Hi, good morning, and welcome back to session 2 that we are looking at covering today, on the unit organization and behavior that we started last week. Just a quick recap in terms of what we covered last week with regards to, the content on this unit. What we looked at was initially a bit of an overview in terms of why organization and organization behavior in terms of the individuals and people who work within the organization is important. We then went on to look at discussing things on the different types of leadership theories, and we briefly touched on the three different types, which basically were classical theories, behavioral theories, and obviously the modern theories that we've looked at now with regards to what's shaping up after the post-World War II or the industrialization era. At some stage, after discussing theories like the great man theory, the trait leadership theory, we then, also looked at different types of behavioral theories. We discussed, the grid model in particular, and then how that led to the creation of, something called the path code theory. That means there were leaders at some point in time, according to this theory, which basically show concern both for the organization's result and also for concern for people or staff well-being within the organization. Within that, obviously, we also looked at something called the leader member exchange theory. Then we went on to discuss, the structural theory, which basically suggested that there is no single leadership style. So we basically ended the session by coming across to something which we then concluded with that currently the modern theories basically look at, or when we look at the contingency approach, they basically look at that there is not very there is nothing set specific in terms of how the role of the leader can be defined and what are the traits or characteristics which the leader can actually show within the organization, which can be classified as a leadership style. But going further, what we are going to look at is obviously that's the first view, and going further as we dwell into this unit, what we'll also be looking at is the different types of management styles, which basically go hand in hand in understanding how people, when they become leaders within the organization, actually work, and when they work within management, how do they look at essentially working within management. And there was a kind of a Pictionary which I sent you, which basically defined the modern state style of how the organizations perceive leaders, which was concluded from a study which has been done by Harvard and also by essentially done by Harvard. But basically what they prescribed is that there are 6 types of bosses. And obviously that kind of comes out with a new categorization on, and a perspective of how organizations, in particular people working within organizations in particular, see, people in leadership position as. So we talked about, things like visionary, coach, affiliative boss. There was something called democratic boss, commander, pace setter, and that kind of, then looks at defining how we look at the leadership actually shaping up in the 21st century, wherein it also requires you to have emotional intelligence apart from the IQ, or as we normally know, which makes you a successful leader within the organization. Now, dwelling on that further, what I want to be able to do is today basically look at discussing with you, some of the managerial styles, and the idea of discussing managerial styles in particular would be, really looking at talking about these 4 different styles that we know that kind of exist, and these typically include the managerial styles like you're classified as a manager, but obviously once you are in a managerial position or in a supervisory position, wherein you manage a few employees, few members of staff within the organization, in order to produce effectiveness in terms of goal setting and obviously goal achievement, what we then tend to look at is the impact of what kind of managerial style has when you're working within this particular position, wherein you not just manage your own workload but also manage the workload of your colleagues and peers. So one of the first styles that we will look at is basically something called a bureaucratic style. And the bureaucratic style, in the organization talks about, when the organization actually formulates rules for employees and decision-making authority for their managers. So here what we are looking at is the style essentially seems to be used mostly in public enterprises or public sector organizations, wherein you see that also in large organizations which kind of function or mimic the public sector organizations, companies like IBM, when you look at companies like Microsoft, when you look at, here this style seems to work because they work across geographies. And what tends to happen is that there is a very strong, perception given in terms of managing your staff through the impersonal approach, which helps you better control their activities and obviously the output of work, which is then generated from the staff which actually works with you. So in short, when we look at some of the large organizations which are in the public sector, what we do get to see is that this style is characterized by, people who work within centralized teams or people who are managers and work within centralized teams. And what they look at is they look at the roles and responsibilities of their staff and the people they're responsible for in respective locations. So this is going hand in hand with some sort of a structure wherein you look at, departmentalization, and that is where the managers will basically manage, the centralized teams within those locations, and you get to see this particular style, adopted by managers. Now, it is also it'll also be true that in some cases here, when you look at the bureaucratic style, the managers have an exercise flexibility, and they are always looking to obviously try new things. So the managers in this position, or the managers who show bureaucratic style of working, basically are known to be flexible. They are known to try new things. They are open to new approaches because their idea is to promote innovation and creativity within their team and their department. And this then leads to the creation of, more of, I would say, more development in terms of more productivity. So here, the main characteristics of this particular style is that the managers are quite often task-oriented. And in some cases, the negative being that if, the tasks are not met, you would normally see, the managers developing some sort of a preference for certain employees or certain members of staff which are able to perform well as against the ones which are not able to perform or complete the task given. So it kind of leads to maybe some sort of lower motivational levels or morals in terms of employees. But in general, this style essentially gets to seen wherein most of the the rules and regulations are kind of given by the organization, and the decision-making authority is actually given in the hands of managers who manage a team or a particular department. The second particular style that we will look at, and let me just quickly bring up a few slides just to kind of look at what I'm explaining. So here in particular, what we are looking at is, talking about the, the various aspects of, why these managerial styles are actually effective. When we look at, in particular, when we look at certain departments or, when we look at certain organizations. So managerial styles, are important from an organizational perspective, is because here is what we get to see that you will see managers of managers using basically showing certain behavior and showing certain traits which can be then classified or matched to certain types of styles, which help the organization and the function that they manage to be managed more effectively. And this is something which then looks at the various styles that we are going to discuss. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is obviously show you a few slides which are going to be available on Moodle. But at the same point in time, I'm going to also email that to you today with some handouts, some additional handouts for you to be able to read. So here, just very briefly looking at, can we just 1 second, and I'll bring that up. There are various, obviously, various ways of obviously classifying, these particular styles. But I think what we are going to be looking at in particular is, just understanding from an industry standpoint of view, the various styles which we are commonly aware of are available or as classified in terms of when we particularly study this particular learning outcome with regards to the unit organization and behavior. So I have a few slides which I've currently prepared, and they were primarily done from a point of view of looking at as an exercise which we discussed in our sessions. And then obviously at some stage, this will then help you to basically directly correlate it with the assignment. So I've got, this is a very generic topic, let me be honest with you, but at the same point in time, what we are looking at is from a perspective of studying. There are lots of slides, data, and handouts available, but we're going to be looking at something which is primarily looking at something which is in the industry standard in terms of classification, and what we get to see is something that we can quickly correlate to depending on the discussions that we are doing around this learning outcome, which is learning outcome 2. So bear with me for a second, just give me one more second on this. Yeah, I've got that here. Let's create here folder as well, so that at some stage you have access to this. Okay, here we go. So you should be able to see the screen now, and what I've got here is a few slides which obviously will discuss today's topic. So in general, what we want to be able to do is understand the difference between manager and leader, and then once we've understood the difference between the manager and leader, what we want to be able to do is understand the different management styles, and at some stage apply the leadership theories that we have kind of studied in the last session, to be able to apply them for critical analysis in terms of how both sometimes when you have to be in a leadership position and also are a manager, how do you manage things, and obviously look at the whole concept of managing the leadership versus the usage of a particular management style to be able to get work done effectively or set smart targets, and obviously at that stage keep the employee and the staff motivated to be able to get things done. Now in terms of when we look at the key differences between leaders and managers, what we normally do see is that people who are in the leadership position tend to have a following. That means people who at some stage become leaders because of experience, because of skills, because of the traits that they show, the abilities they have, they tend to have people following them. And in some stages, when we look at the classical definition of managers, we do see that managers have people who work for them. So in those cases, when we look at somebody in a business position, for example, if you're a successful business owner, and in those cases, if you're running your own business, and you sometimes show both the characteristics of being a leader and also a manager, because you manage the business yourself, so you're in that position wherein you're a leadership position, but at the same point in time, as a manager within that business, you're able to get work done, you're able to build a team, you're able to then get them on board, and obviously at some stage show them the vision and the direction in which they have to move to be able to get the work done. Now, there are lots of things that you will look at when we look at establishing differences between leaders and managers, but there are some that we look at in particular, wherein what we do get to see is that we classify leaders particularly as people who can actually create or have a vision. So in most cases, when you look at the example of, say, for example, the iPhone, just because the iPhone was launched yesterday or day before yesterday. So if you look at the position of Steve Jobs, now he was not just when you have comparisons, and if you study the autobiography of Steve Jobs, what you will get to see is that he's known more of as a leader, because he had the vision to create these products. He had the vision for the company, and that is where you get to see that a lot of people compare him as a visionary leader, or person in a position wherein he was able to inspire his people to create and believe in the vision that he has. So he is more classified as a leader. But when we do get to do comparisons between whether he was a successful leader or a successful manager, what we do see is that his autobiography kind of points out that he was more of in the leadership position than in the managerial position, because he was known for his temper, and sometimes if he could not get his way in terms of understanding the way the products needed to be made, or his vision needed to be kind of classified, he actually fired employees. So he used to have a very nasty attitude in terms of anger. Now, one of the other things that you will get to see, so when we look at the differentiations between what is a leader and who's a manager, or the differences between them, what we do get to see generally is that leaders are able to create a vision and managers are able to achieve or create goals. That means they set targets, and those targets are realistic targets which their teams or their organizations can achieve. And that's one of the key differences that we look at, differences between leadership and between managers. So when we look at leadership basically requires a key competence, which is knowledge and skill, and it also requires commitment, because when you create a vision, you require a commitment to go, ruthlessly after that vision to be able to realize that vision that you have created for the company or for the business or for the organization. And obviously these things from a leadership perspective, they require things like motivation, willingness, and obviously the confidence to be able to achieve that. The second difference that we look at between leaders and managers are that leaders generally act as change agents. Because of the vision they bring in, they normally kind of go in and disrupt, or basically bring a change within the organization. Whereas when you look at managers, they kind of are happy to maintain the status quo, and they are happy to go along in terms of the the daily activities or operations which have been set out. So why leaders are also called disruptors or change agents is because of the fact that they believe that innovation and change is the only constant. So they look at continuously bringing change into the organization. They are willing to embrace change, and they know exactly how things need to be working for them to be able to achieve that goal which they have set. Now, the other differences, just to quickly go through, would be leaders sometimes you will see are quite unique. You will not see any two particular people showing the same kind of leadership style or the leadership traits. So they are willing to adapt, they are willing to adopt, they are self-aware, they work very creatively, they are innovative, and sometimes what they do is they are ruthless in terms of going after particular objectives. So leaders are quite unique because of the traits and characteristics they show or have or they believe in. But managers, on the other hand, they tend to kind of it's easier to become a manager because you are able to get that hands-on experience, and once you get that experience, you're able to mimic and show those characteristics and behaviors to be able to function as a successful manager in that position. So this key difference is that leaders normally tend to be unique because they have a singular vision or they have an objective against which they would go after. But on the other hand, when you look at managers, they are quite happy to basically kind of work on the aspect of just maintaining the status quo and going forward on that. Now, leaders are also known to take risks. That means they take, sometimes you can say, calculated risk or uncalculated risk. So again, sticking to the example of Apple today, when you look at Steve Jobs, when in 1993, when he took a calculated gamble of acquiring Pixar, that was a gamble which actually led the board to fire him from the organization. That was big enough risk for Apple to take at that point in time, and he was thrown out of his own company that he created, and he was so passionate about. But then leaders are known to take that risk because they want to try and bring innovation and creativity into things that they believe in could make maybe the world a better place. So, for example, from his perspective, he really thought that there are things that that are synergistic with the businesses, and that is where he took huge amount of uncalculated risks, wherein actually the board decided to fire him because those risks could have jeopardized the position of the company, the profitability, and things like that. Managers, on the other hand, they are trained to control risk. They kind of work in a position wherein they try to minimize the risk. So they try and seek, and they try and control, or basically they try and avoid problems which actually create risks within the organization. You also will see that one of the other key differences that you will also see is leaders think on a long-term basis. They think of something which is long-term, but managers will basically look at things which are short-term. So they always, you will see a manager is a good manager if he's able to set smart targets, which are smart, realistic. They are basically specific, measurable. They are kind of achievable. They are realistic, and they are time-bound. And managers always set targets which are kind of short-term. Short-term would mean 12 months, 6 months, 12 to 18 months. But when you look at leaders setting targets, they basically set targets which are 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. So they are intentionally long-term, because the vision of the organization requires time, effort, money, resources, and also the staff to get behind the vision. You will also see that in some cases, leaders are able to kind of look at the aspect of they kind of grow personally. That means they basically look at acquiring skills. They look at things which they feel they are passionate about, and they go after it single-handedly, or the singular vision of acquiring that skill. So sometimes you will see that leaders they tend to grow in the aspect of because in their own field, because they are quite curious. They seem to they want to be they want to have the information, knowledge which is relevant to the vision that they are creating. And when you look at, again, going back to the example of Apple, when you look at people remembering Steve Jobs, they clearly come out with a singular kind of similar words about him, wherein they talk about that he always looked at things from a technological perspective, wherein technology could be embraced or it could be dovetailed with the humanity kind of thing, or human usability kind of thing. And he always people think about Steve Jobs and come out with words like he always looked at changing the world for the better. That means he always wanted to bring out products which were easily usable, which provided the interface which actually helped people to interact, communicate, or disseminate information in a much clearer, much easier fashion. And that is where he kind of then had a very different personality. And because of his personality, they basically try and look at things from their own angle. But when you look at managers, they rely on existing skills or proven theories. For example, if you're given some work to be able to finish with the deadline, what you will tend to do is that you will depend on certain workable models and frameworks to be able to get those things done in a particular time frame, because those have been actually defined from a point of view, setting the goals and then obviously going out and achieving them. So I'll send you a small handout on this, which is important, because at some stage when we study the leadership and managerial styles and we look at how do we implement these leadership theories, with regards to the management styles. This is going to be helpful so that you are able to clearly differentiate between the role of a leader and the role of a manager. Now, going back to basically looking at the leadership styles, that is what we were looking at. Some of the things that we have covered here, will come out in the slides that you see, traits of a a leader, ex-leader, and stuff like that. So, going further, going to different of leadership styles. So, I know when we talk about the different types of leadership styles, we basically look at this is more directly related to a classification, for example, which we generally get to see in terms of how we discuss classical theories and classical management styles. So bureaucratic, democratic, and then we look at the third one, which is autocratic, and the other one that we look at is laissez-faire, or basically situational style. Now these four styles are based on the traditional definitions of management styles. So bureaucratic we discussed. Democratic is something that we are looking at, wherein a leader primarily looks at, inviting participation from every employee. So here, what we are looking at is the person showing this particular style will basically have, a structure wherein he or she will actually invite everybody's participation for them to be able to complete a job or complete a task or a set of activities which has been given. Now this style is basically morally desirable, but it hardly seems to be practiced by any business organization, because at the end of the day what you get to see is that in the democratic style there is sharing of responsibility between employees, and sometimes the decision making can be delayed. So most organizations want to employ what you call is the democratic style, but at some stage what they can't be seen as doing is that everybody having the responsibility but nobody having the decision making power. So in this case what we do get to see is that decision making, because of this particular style of working, in some cases you get to see, because the consensus is not reached, can be delayed, and this then leads to larger and larger number of stakeholders being involved in the decision making process, which sometimes makes moves or switching over of priorities difficult. Now we get to see this particular style being enacted out in different types of businesses, organizations, which are kind of partnerships. So one of the examples in the UK context that we look at seems to work and fit perfectly well with this kind of style is basically John Lewis partnership. So when you look at John Lewis in particular, as every employee is a partner or owns the stock of the company, decision making on key areas is done through the democratic route. And that is why this is a good example when you want to look at wherein decision making involves a large number of stakeholders, and in this case sometimes taking decisions or making decisions has to get buy-in from every partner or every employee within the company. The third style we look at is basically the autocratic style, and here when we look at the autocratic style is basically this particular style is going out of most organizations. You get to see autocratic means wherein you basically have a leader directing others within the team to be able to do things, and he sets the task or she will set the task. And this kind of style is what we get to see is now becoming redundant in most modern day organizations or businesses, is because this style sets wherein it is very particular and it is personality driven. So it is one person driven, and you get to see this when you say autocratic. Sometimes you get to see this in an example would be army or armed forces in particular, wherein you have the journal giving the orders and obviously everybody has to follow. So there are very few organizations which have this kind of style, but when in particular when you look at this particular approach, you find in certain cases when you're working on certain time-bound projects or when you're working on objectives which have been set to be achieved in a particular point in time, you will see that sometimes managers do exhibit this style because they want to get things or tasks done within the time frame which have been allocated. So here what you will get to see, the other characteristics is that the employees normally seek to get advice from the manager. They want constant direction. There is constant supervision from the manager to be able to make sure that the simple tasks are done and they are done as per the instructions or the instructions set given. Now in some cases, if this style is worked, through and throughout, you will get to see that productivity gets affected. You will have some sort of a relationship which will develop within the organization, within the departments. Is most employees see the manager as a kind of a parent-child partnership. That means the manager will say what needs to be done. If the manager says that needs to be done, then it will be done. If he doesn't give any instructions out, then in some cases the work does not happen. So employees do not take initiative, and it is down to the manager to be able to delegate work and give or direct by employees to be able to do work in this kind of a situation. And what we have also seen is that, in some cases, this style at the top of the, in the top management is seen as a detrimental, style, because this does not allow the organization as a whole to grow and show innovative and creativity as far as the sector is concerned. Because sometimes you'll get to see leaders being selfish and obviously, and they are motivated by self-interest, which then leads to, in some cases, the downfall of organizations. So when you look at, the downfall of organizations like Enron, in particular, in the early 2000s, you will get to see that, this was because the leadership, nobody in the organization actually questioned the leadership styles, and everybody just took it that way, that okay, if that has been given, then that's fine, and we'll have to get on with it. Now, the last one that we look at is obviously the situational style. In this case, what we look at is there are different styles which the leader or the manager will basically show, and this kind of a style will particularly mean that the manager would choose to depict a particular management style depending on the circumstances or the situation in which he or she finds herself in. So that is why it is called the situational style, but it does not need to be confused wherein, here the employees, have the inability or, have the ability to be able to adopt these styles is because the organization requires participation from the managers, and the participation, from the employees and the managers requires you to kind of change your management style to suit the situation. And a particular example of this that I will point out and share with you is, you look at the Plan A, which is basically, let's look at the organization Marks and Spencer. And when you look at Plan A was basically nothing but, a plan drafted by Marks and Spencer to be able to, look at achieving, self-sustainability in terms of their stores functioning, looking at, the corporate social responsibility, looking at using environmentally friendly packaging, reduce the landfills or the, trash or the waste going to the landfills and things like that. So under this particular plan, what they're looking at is they looked at, if you look at this particular plan, the situation will actually direct, and it will mean, depending on the situation, the managers in different locations or different departments within the Marks and Spencer as a company will need to choose a management style to be able to get things done or meet the objectives. Now, this plan is obviously, looking at achieving, looking at taking Marks and Spencer to achieve the objective set by 2020. And that is why, in this case, Marks and Spencer, you see the, kind of the use of the functional and the situational style, which basically helps to create teams and leaders within the organization to try and achieve this Plan A, which has been set, and the activities which have been set to be achieved by 2020. So this involves individuals from various backgrounds, as in the culture of the organization, they have diversity. They are working with different types of individuals, different backgrounds, different culture, and because the organization has presence in very many countries, they have to adopt and also adapt to the local environment, the local conditions, to be able to effectively delegate jobs and manage those jobs so that the company objectives are also met. And at the same point in time, the company is able to run a structure which is not like an airtight structure, but the information is allowed to flow. And in some cases, where the objectives can be molded to suit the situation, and that is why you will get to see that this kind of a style is followed within Marks and Spencer for the implementation of Plan A. Now, when we look at obviously different types of theories, and we relate this, for example, here, when you look at the theory X and Y, you will see that the theory X and Y basically concluded that where X managers treat humans or staff as on the basis of their likes and dislikes, and the control is required. And on the other hand, you look at Y managers, which treat staff, and they share the responsibility in terms of the job and the job jobs given, to share that burden and obviously accomplish that as a team or as a part of the team. So it implies clearly that there is no single style which is correct in a particular situation, is because most organizations are currently going through a vast phase of globalization. So the big companies, when you look at, they're expanding, they have employees in different countries, different geographies, and at some stage when you look at, because they have to comply with different law and legislation, different types of environments, what you'll get to see is a different kind of a style which is emerging now in terms of leadership, and that is seeming to be. Give me 1 second.
So it's just, are you all right to see that later?
Yeah.
I'll speak to them.
Cheers. Okay. So what we get to see is that a different kind of a style which is currently emerging is something which we've seen, which leaders or organizations are adopting, or leaders in particular are kind of promoting, is what we get to see is, which is called the going back to leadership styles, looking at transformational and transactional, and TA or TF. Now these are coming in because of the fact that a lot of organizations are undergoing transformation. They are becoming from small companies to large organizations. Some of them are obviously going across different geographies. So there's a transformation happening of the business, from being a local organization or a local company based in the UK to a global organization. And in some cases, when you look at when the operations are pretty much set, but these operations are becoming, they are growing within each of the geographies. So for example, when we look at Amazon as a company, what you will see is that Amazon's business is now very well set. Whichever country or geography it operates in, its business is growing. And when you look at those businesses growing, their transactions, because they're inheriting a lot of customers, they have new customers which are coming in and interacting with the platform, their transactions are increasing. So here, if you see, the leaders are now pretty much adopting something which is to do with transactional styles. That means they want people, more and more people within the position, to be able to come, when I say be in the leadership position, is those who have the ability to be able to manage transactions and manage a lot of them on a grand scale. So they tend to show, some sort of a transactional side of leadership. But when you look at a company like Dell, wherein Michael Dell, who's the founder of the company, when you look at Dell Computers, he has taken the company private, and he's taken it off the stock market, is because of the fact that the company is undergoing transformation, and he feels that he's come and joined the company back again, and he's in the driving position right now, is because at some point in time he was the chairman, but there was somebody else who was actually managing the day-to-day operations. What he feels is that the company, when it started a couple of decades back, it had relevant products and it was reaching out to its customers. It brought in a model which was a just-in-time model, wherein you can go on to the website of Dell Computers, configure a PC to your configuration you want, and that could have been delivered to you, within a span of 3, 5, 7 days from anywhere in the world that you ordered on their website. But because if you see in the last couple of years, the business model has really changed. The PC usage is going down, the market is sliding, and also what we do get to see is cloud computing coming up, other services which are based in and around, or different types of devices which are now making the internet possible, accessibility to internet possible. So he decided to come back into the company and obviously take the control of the helm gear of the company. And as founder member of the organization, he decided that I need to take the company private, remove it from the pressures of the stock exchange, the shareholders. And in that, what he has now brought in is that he's realigning the strategy of the company, the long-term growth path of the company, by bringing in new products and services, maybe acquiring a few companies. Shows what he's trying to do is he's going to transform the old Dell Computers as an organization to the 21st century more relevant Dell computers or Dell as an organization, and that shows something called transformational style of leadership. So here he's going to try and bring changes which are going to be driven, which will help the company kind of coexist and coexist, but also ward off competition in the prevailing economic circumstances. So he's going to employ he's going to be kind of showing he's going to be doing a transformation in terms of transforming the company from where it is in terms of losing market leader as of now, in terms of losing market share, losing its position in terms of the market leadership, but he wants to transform it back again to being the leader in the market and having the products and services which make it a leading organization within this field of information communication and technology. And here is what he's showing, something called transformational style of leadership. And in doing so, he is going to be using different types of management styles. So at some stage, he might be, in some form, departments of the business or in some, functions of the business, he will probably, and his managers will probably show bureaucratic style. In some cases, they will show complete autocratic style. In some cases, they will show, democratic management style, because they will want to move the company lock, stock, and barrel from the market losing position to a market leader position again. And this is to be accomplished, in a certain point in time that is defined as the new vision for Dell. And that is where you get to see that as a leader and as a manager, he will set goals and targets which will have commensurate award, remuneration, and certain incentive schemes that will help transform the organization from point A to point B, and in a particular point in time, so that they do not lose out on their existing customers, but at the same point in time, they are able to, look at, for example, reorienting the business to make it profitable from being a loss-making business. So again, these kind of things, you get to see within organizations, and you will tend to see that sometimes managerial styles work in a way wherein they increase the levels of motivation of their employees or their staff to get the work done effectively, to increase productivity in the organization. But at the same point in time, the leadership styles tend to follow a particular situation or a pattern. So here, in the case of Dell, would be looking at the market in general and the economic conditions it is creating, wherein competitors like HP, competitors which are competitors of Dell like IBM, HP, Lenovo, they are going forward, and the company is actually losing ground in terms of being a market leader. And that is where you'll get to see leadership styles coupled with management styles will be looking at transforming or changing the vision of the company and reorienting the company and the organization in general to move it from place A to place B, so that it again becomes relevant as far as the business sector is concerned. In the case of Dell, for example, looking at IT in general. So this for us, would look at primarily covering the management styles and how we correlate this to the leadership styles theories that we've studied from a perspective of looking at the learning outcome 2 in particular. Now, just to open this specification sheet, so what we are also looking at briefly covering today would be, the types of organizational structures. Now, the whole aspect of studying management and leadership styles is to look at how it affects the structure of the organization. What kind of leadership style influences what development or what kind of structure in the organization or hierarchy in the organization. And at some stage in the next session, we will also look at how does the culture, how does the structure of the organization affect the culture, and are they related? And if they are related, how do they influence each other? So very briefly looking at, in terms of, the organizational structures, there are, various types of structures within the organization, what we look at. But I think most structures, it will be fair to say that most structures in the organization which are formed because they want to be able to, kind of look at the POLC framework. That means every organization, every business organizes itself so that they are effectively able to achieve certain objectives which have been set by the board or the management of the organization. So it is fair to say that at some stage when we look at structures, the organizational structures, they can also be classified as bureaucratic, autocratic, democratic, and situational or laissez-faire style, because the people working within these organizations tend to kind of influence the structures which get formed. And that is where, when we look at studying the structures within the organization, we tend to see that they are organized around these four key parameters. That means planning. There'll be people in the organization who will be responsible for planning, the defining the vision and mission. They will be responsible for defining the strategy, and also for setting the yearly, annual, bi-yearly, or when you look at goals and objectives, it could be 3 months, quarterly, maybe 6 monthly, could be annually, things like that. There are people who will be responsible within the structure who look at basically designing the in terms of departmentalization. There are things which basically because of that departmentalization affect culture, and also lead to the creation of social networks, or networks within the employees. And then we look at the framework wherein it expands. So planning, organizing, we look at leading, and we look at controlling. So leading would mean things like leadership, decision making. You have functions like communication, creation of groups and teams. When you look at, for example, a new iPhone coming out, there's a group, or there's a group of teams which will work on a particular product. And there are 3 new models that they've launched. For example, the iPhone 8, the iPhone 8 Plus, and the iPhone 10. So there would have been 3 different teams. It is fair to assume that there would have been 3 different teams at least working on 3 large teams, and within them there could be different number of groups working in order to bring that products to the market. Obviously, when you look at putting the structure, the leader, and the manager in, and you involve that as a dynamic, you normally have a direct bearing on the motivation of employees, the morale of the employees. And at some stage, you look at the functions of control. That means you have systems and processes, and you have HR, which plays a very important role in maintaining the culture within the organization, the structure within the organization, the people, the review and the appraisal process for managers and leaders within the organization, which tends to then drive everyone towards achieving something which has been set as a goal or as an objective within the organization, whatever be it. So from that aspect, if I look at, there are 4 different types of structures that you will get to see which get formed within the organization. Some of these structures are classified as, there's a central structure, there's a formal structure, there's a hierarchical structures, and then sometimes when you see departmentalization. So these are the types of structures that you will get to see which come about within organizations. So when you look at centralized and decentralized structure, they are all about creating or establishing balance. Now, centralized structures, are basically involved in places or companies wherein you get to see that the main operational aspect in terms of decision making is, is kind of centered into the head office. So, for every, for example, these are organizations wherein you will get to see decision making happening in the head office. And in some cases, when you look at decentralized structure, here what you will see is that the managers, the leaders will equip the managers, or the people in management position will equip their managers or subordinates to be able to take decisions, and this can happen in a decentralized manner or in divisional offices. Look at the example of Caterpillar, which is one of the more world-renowned US companies, which obviously creates a lot of products like the bulldozers, the diggers, and stuff like that. Here, when you look at the process of decision making, it is more decentralized. And the reason why this is more decentralized is that because the equipment or the products that they sell can be only sold because the average value of the product is quite high. So these products can only be sold in different countries depending on the decisions or the decision-making structures being decentralized, is because they have things like the exchange rate, the buying potential, the requirement in the market, the demand and supply, and those things and variables affect what kind of decisions the local office can take to be able to sell and promote their products. So just as a macro example, what you can look at is As a company, Caterpillar has a decentralized, decision-making structure, and they tend to normally have their offices operate as divisions within different countries, and they are free to take, decisions which are rightly allowing the company to increase sales and, increase customer satisfaction. Now, in some cases, when you look at formalization as a process, what is formalization? It is basically the extent to which an organization's policies, procedures, rules are written explicitly, articulated. An example of that is if you look at an HR department in a large organization, like say, let's look at Microsoft, they define most of the policies and procedures which employees have to follow. So you have a very formal structure wherein when you join the organization, you go through an induction process, you're given a handbook, employee handbook, and that employee handbook actually contains written and explicit rules, implicit and explicit rules and regulations which you as an employee are bound to follow. And that leads to the creation of something called a formalized structure. That means you can only do certain things which are allowed for employees to do. For example, if you look at an organization like Apple, just taking to that example, there is a very strict code on secrecy within the organization. So when engineers and people work within the organization in Apple, they are sworn to secrecy, and that is something which is a part of their formal structure, a part of their induction. And when you look at the organization in general, anybody who works within the company clearly knows what they can and cannot do, and that leads to a creation of rules and written set of rules which are then given out to employees or people working within the organization so that they can kind of do their job very well, and they know the remit of their job and their job description. Then we come across to hierarchical levels. Now, when you see hierarchy, basically what tends to happen is in organizations, you will see several layers of management. That means if it's a very large organization, you will get to see that because there are very many departments, there are lots of employees. At some stage, what tends to happen is the organization follows some sort of a structure to define hierarchy within the organization. So here, a typical example would be you have an organization like, say, for example, Microsoft. Taking to the example of Microsoft, you will get to see that you have the company has operations in many countries. So in each country, they have somebody who's the president, who's actually internally a general manager when it reports to the head office. And underneath them, they have a structure of the organization, which then basically, you have a president, you have a few vice presidents, which take care of vice president of finance, for example. They take care of HR, production, engineering, manufacturing, things like that. And underneath that, you have another structure or layer of management, which basically will look after, say, general manager. They will manage a certain number of teams, and each team works on different functions. And underneath that, you have managers. So it kind of becomes a hierarchical structure. And here, what you get to see is the several layers of management between employees at the frontline level. That means people who interact with customers directly, and then people who are at the top positions. You see that fewer employees here report to the manager. So what you will get to see is that we'll have small teams, each team being led by a team leader reporting into a manager, and then the manager reporting into a management member to be able to look at some sort of decision making. Now, the advantage is that here, normally within organizations which have a tall structure, they see greater opportunities for managers to supervise and obviously monitor employee activities. That means there are lots of transactions, there are lots of customers they're dealing with. So this you normally get to see in very large organizations like P&G, Unilever. You look at some of the IT organizations like Microsoft, Facebook, Google. You will see this kind of a structure which allows things to be managed appropriately, function appropriately. Now, flat type of structures typically have fewer management levels. That means they have fewer layers of management. These kind of structures you get to see in different types of organizations, wherein you will get to see that the employees would normally have access. The frontline employees will have access to the management or maybe the top boss. And here, a large number of employees might work and report into a single manager. So an example of this would be manufacturing organizations. If you look at the car manufacturing sector in general, at the production floor, the production floor manager basically manages 250, 300 employees in a particular shift. And here, the structure is quite flat. That each employee within the organization or within that production floor can actually approach the manager and can discuss more sensitivize or talk about issues which he or she might be facing. So you don't tend to have many layers, but you still have a hierarchical structure wherein the person managing a large number of employees and the employees having direct access to the top boss within the organization. Now, you could also look at some differences in terms of how they are classified. So, for example, sometimes when you look at departmentalization, again in large organizations, or even in small businesses, you get to see there are various people with various responsibilities. So sometimes you organize them on the basis of functions. That means that this department looks after marketing, sales, this look after manufacturing. So basically, under departments, you organize them on the basis of the key functions that they do, and those could be functional structures. But when you look at divisional structures, that is here when you look at the organization will actually organize its its manpower, its employees on the basis of products and services they provide. So when you look at example of, again, sticking to Microsoft, you have them organizing them on the basis of divisions. For example, Microsoft has a gaming division, Xbox. They have a search division, which is Bing. They have Windows, which is one of the other divisions. And then you have Windows Mobile, which is for mobile phones. And then you have cloud computing and things like that. So they've organized their business on the basis of the types of services, products and services they provide to customers globally. And this kind of a structure, what you get to see is basically a divisional structure. A functional structure you get to see. So within the divisional structures, you could still have functional structures. So for example, when you look at Microsoft as an organization wherein they have a gaming division, but within the gaming division, they might have functional structures, like because it's a large, form of, large arm of Microsoft, and that contributes a significant amount of turnover to the overall company revenues. And I think if I just quickly Google up gaming revenues for Microsoft, so this as a business, kind of contributes up to about, $1.9 billion in terms of, $23.6 billion in terms of, revenue alone from that division. So when you look at that particular division, what we do get to see is within that, they will have a marketing department, they will have a manufacturing department, they will have a finance department. And because the size of the business is so large and the contribution the business makes it so large, is that it allows it to have the functional structures under the divisional structure. And this is a typical example that I've showed up on the slide. When you have a CEO on the top, you have organized, organization organized in the terms of functions, and then you have a CEO on the top, but you organize it under the type of products and services it provides. So here I've taken an example of a company which is like, Pfizer, which has medical devices, consumer products, baby care products, diabetic products, and nutritional products, supplements. But here in the case of, an organization, say you could put Microsoft here, or, any other FMCG organization wherein they organize it in terms of, functional structures. This is a typical example where organize it in the form of departmentalization, but you are having functional and product-wise. And in the case of you have Johnson & Johnson, you have customer departmentalization, and in some cases you have territory departmentalization, because the company functions across various continents and they each have different requirements. And because of the different requirements, they are able to, the size of operation dictates that they need to have regionalized structures which are dependent in terms of the territory, and also understand the culture and the requirements of the local economy or the environment, and according to which they create this particular structure, which is territory departmentalization. Now, there are some differences we look at, which is how most of these structures are also kind of disappearing as we go along, from a point of view of looking at modern day companies. And sometimes you get to see matrix organization. They create a balance of traditional functional structure, but also related to a product. So, for example, when you look at an employee working within the UK, might be reporting into the head office in US, and that would mean that he works within a functional structure here, which is in the UK geography, but on a matrix basis, because he, as a product manager, for example, he works within the UK geography, but he also reports into the global product manager when you look at to the US market, and that would kind of show that that employee works within a matrix. That means he functionally works with his counterpart in the US because he's a product manager, but he administratively reports into somebody in the UK, which is to manage things like the HR function and the the yearly appraisals and things like that. Now, when we take an example of organization, which is the millennial organizations, like when we look at the Facebook and when you look at Google, some of the organizations wherein they have lots of employees spread across geographies. You can also look at that sometimes you have a large team, say within IBM, which is working within India, but they're working on certain products, but they are seamlessly connected to the head office in US. And that is where you get to see a simulation of boundaryless organizations, because traditional barriers are overcome because of technology, and they have connectivity between the offices, which allows them to interact between the internal and the external side of the environments. So maybe workers within the Indian geography, but also at the same point in time with people in management within the US side, because of the connectivity that they tend to have within the offices. And the learning organizations, when we talk about, basically they tend to be talking about things like when you see training organizations in particular, or when large organizations set up training divisions, what they expect to do is, it used to be that in the previous, when you look at the previous decades, most companies used to organize training days. And the training days used to be wherein the training used to happen in various offices. And what they were looking at is keeping the knowledge and the content which is required for the employees to work at the cutting edge. And those then provided training days. But nowadays, what the organizations have done is they've created a portal, and that portal is accessible across. It is maintained by somebody in the head office, or maybe a department within the HR, within the head office. But most employees have logins and other things, and they can actively seek to acquire new knowledge and can do trainings on the fly. That means you do not need to have now dedicated days to be able to do trainings, but they can do trainings across the year, which could be defined in the handbook, saying that, okay, every employee has to do CPD training for so many number of hours, and they can pick and choose the courses or the training which are going to make them do their job more effectively. So looking at an example of a matrix structure, that is what you get to see, wherein a person works in a particular department can also report to a different person in a different geography. And that is what is kind of seen in an organization like Google or IBM, wherein the person actually works within the project management department, but also if he or she is actually working on a larger project, can also report into a different department based in a different geography, and that kind of symbolizes the matrix structure. So I think in terms of what I'm going to do is obviously try and end the session today, because by looking at just the advantages of different types of structures which work within the organization, and why organizations then choose to look at certain type of structures which kind of fit their business models and fit the operations in terms of how they are spread across various countries. A typical example here would be an example of a company like Nike, which has a matrix organization. They follow this particular structure because it allows them to create a very structured response. They have manufacturing in a particular geography, for example, Vietnam or China, and then the manufacturing there could be outsourced in terms of third party. It could not be a Nike factory, but in order to maintain constant interaction with them, the head office in the US or the head office in the UK has constant communication, and they constantly work together with that third party to be able to deliver products effectively to all markets where Nike, currently sells the product. Now, this then allows them to kind of differentiate their functions, but also have a structure wherein each of the departments speaks to each other, or the production facility speaks to the sales and marketing in the US and the UK, so that they clearly know what is the demand and supply and how much they are manufacturing, but at the same point in time allows them to alienate problems which would arise in different departments, and then allows them to provide quick responses to or solutions to those problems, because they can clearly alienate where the problem is occurring, or where the situation requires attention of a particular manager at any given point in time. When we look at some of the disadvantages, we do get to see that sometimes there's a bit of a power struggle. So if I work administratively with a person in the UK, but I also functionally work with a person in the US, sometimes there are situations wherein you require more. You need to be able to balance work, but from a point of view of disadvantages, that it leads to a bit of a catch-22, wherein sometimes you're seen to be working more with the one particular person in your day-to-day function, which tends to say that, okay, functionally you're working, that's fine, but administratively you're supposed to complete these many jobs which you have not been able to do. So this turns out to be a bit of an advantage, and you do feel sometimes the employee motivation and morale actually suffers. Now, because of the matrix structure, as you can understand, if you're working and reporting into different places, normally you get to see this in almost engineering organizations, software organizations, wherein you're working as a part of a large project, but you're working in a small team, but you're also having to work within a large team to be able to deliver the full product. And that is where coordination sometimes becomes, an issue. It can also lead to interpersonal conflicts, because sometimes you will get to see teams and members within the team not able to coordinate or cooperate in terms of objectives to be fulfilled, because they tend to prioritize their own objectives, which are from a point of view of the departments they function in, and that then tends to kind of create interpersonal conflicts. Sometimes you get to see employees end up leaving such organizations because if it becomes too difficult to manage, creates ambiguity in terms of the role and the job description, then you will get to see that the employees tend to leave the organization and seek avenues elsewhere, because having to have a bit of a crisscross, that means you work with somebody, but you're not able to accomplish the goals and objectives because you report administratively into somebody else, and the way you are being managed then basically creates that ambiguity and conflict within the role that you're doing, and sometimes you get to see that employees end up leaving the organization. So just looking at very briefly, and then in the next session we're going to be able to do is basically go on to cover the impact of the organizational structure on the culture of the organization. How it influences the culture of the organization is what we're going to look at in the next session. So as always, any queries, any questions, please email, and I'm going to send out a copy of this and presentation and handout, which will give you some sort of concentrated reading on the things that we've discussed today, which is the management styles, difference between a manager and a leader, and lastly, the different type of organizational structures that we looked at, so that you can kind of crystallize your understanding with regards to this learning outcome too. And what we're going to do in the next session would be to primarily look at understanding the extent to which the structure of the organization influences the culture, and how we are going to use the leadership theories that we've studied and the management styles to be able to see how organizations use different styles of leadership and management to infuse innovation and bring about creativity from a point of view of learning and from a point of view of team working. And that will lead us into our learning outcome 3. So thanks so much for joining this session today, and I will catch up with you next week. In the meanwhile, any queries, any questions, if you need further reading, please do come back to me on email, and I will try and send that across to you as soon as. Thanks again. Bye.